Welcome back to History Class with Dr. W. We're continuing our discussion in this lecture of combat during the Revolutionary War, focusing in this lecture on the war in the South and the ultimate outcome of the war, the victory at Yorktown and the surrender of the British. In 1779 to 1780, the British began to look more to the South, where there was a considerable loyalist population, along with lots of natural resources and crops like tobacco, indigo, and rice that might be useful both to the troops themselves and also to continue financing the war. As we saw in the North, early on in the South, the British scored a series of impressive victories, conquering cities like Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, and winning other victories like at the Battle of Camden in South Carolina. Throughout this process, though, there were Southerners on the colonial side who harassed loyalist troops and also fought against the British when they could. Most noteworthy, perhaps, among these sort of guerrilla warriors was Francis Marion of South Carolina, who was known as the Swamp Fox. He got that nickname after British Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton, who chased Marion into a swamp and followed him for some 7 hours before giving up. Tarleton said, "As for this damned old fox, the devil himself could not catch him." That was Francis Marion. Francis Marion became an expert in unconventional warfare, we might call guerrilla warfare, using small numbers of troops and launching surprise attacks against the British and then retreating often back into the swamp where he could not be successfully captured. Momentum began to shift in the war in the South in 1781 when colonial forces defeated the British at Cowpens in South Carolina, and then followed that with a string of other victories scattered across the Carolinas. While the British still held considerable sway and controlled major cities like Savannah and Charleston, the British commander Lord Cornwallis decided to reconsolidate his troops and retreated for the winter of 1781 to their well-fortified base at Yorktown. While Yorktown seemed to be a logical place for the British to reconsolidate and regroup, the fort was well defended and well supplied, it also depended in large measure on the supremacy of the British Navy, which up to that point in the war had not been questioned. But in the fall of 1781, a large French naval force arrived on the scene and shifted the balance of power on the seas. The British now no longer had an easy sea route to escape from Yorktown, which actually now proved to be their undoing because without access to the sea, they were able to be surrounded by other colonial forces. George Washington, accompanied by a large French force under Comte de Rochambeau, surrounded Yorktown and trapped Cornwallis and the British forces there. Realizing there was no hope for escape, Cornwallis surrendered in October 1781, and this really marked the end of the major conflict in the Revolutionary War, as the most significant British force at that point had surrendered. Following Yorktown, there were a series of negotiations which ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, ending the Revolutionary War itself. This treaty recognized American independence, established the border between America and Canada, and recognized American fishing rights in the seas as well. Now we're going to talk for the next couple of lectures about some of the outcomes of the Revolutionary War and what it meant for those living in the colonies now becoming the United States at that time. Just how radical was the American Revolution for those at home? Well, there was a difference of opinion about that. But certainly the Revolutionary War had become a revolution in two senses. In the one sense, the most obvious, they were fighting a war of revolution against British control. They were fighting to overthrow British rule. And clearly, with the Treaty of Paris, the revolution had succeeded on that score. And yet the revolution was fought in another sense as well. And this is what we're going to be discussing over the next couple of lectures. The Declaration of Independence had set out ideas like equality, independence, liberty. What exactly did those ideas mean? There were, of course, many people living in the colonies who didn't experience equality and even liberty in a very real sense of the word. Slaves, Native Americans, women, some immigrants, the poor, all struggled, even as we now establish an independent and new nation to be known as the United States. So we're going to talk about what the revolution meant for groups like those over the next few lectures.